So welcome to today's second grade math presentation. So today we're going to be learning about measurement. We're going to use body parts, handspans, and fingers to measure desk, notebook. We're also going to estimate and compare which is heavier/lighter and more or less water. We're going to also introduce terms like longer and shorter, heavier and lighter, more or less, and taller or shorter. So let's sort of talk about what measurement is. So with measurement, we can determine different things about an object. For example, we can measure the length, height, weight, and other characteristics of an object. So let's keep on going with the introduction. How can we measure things? Today, we're going to measure things using our hands and compare different objects. We are also going to measure based on what we feel. For example, we can feel that one object is heavier than another. Let's try it. Compare the measurements of your desk and your notebook. Use handspans to compare which is longer. So handspans are when you take your hand and stretch it out, and then from your tip of your pinky to the tip of your thumb, and use that handspan to measure your desk and then measure your notebook. So from the tip of your pinky to tip of your thumb while your hand is stretched. And then also do that for your notebook. And if you don't have a notebook or a desk, then use a different object and use handspans to compare which one is longer. So measure each one. Now, my desk is 8 handspans and my notebook is 1 handspan. So, which number is greater, 8 or 1? Since we already learned this, 8 is greater than 1. So, because 8 is greater than 1, the desk is going to be longer than the notebook. So, we can say the desk is longer than the notebook, or the notebook is. Yeah. So, it's also important to note something. We have to teach something else. So let's say we have one object that is 12 inches. And we have another object that is 2 feet. Which object is longer? So here, even though 12 is greater than 2, these aren't the same units of measurement. So, for example, handspans can be 1 unit, so your handspan can be a unit of measurement. Inches, feet. So 12 is greater than 2, but since they're not the same unit measurement, we can't just say 12 is greater than 2. We have to convert it. So 2 feet is actually 24 inches because 1 foot is 12 inches and 12 times 2 is 24. So actually, object B is longer because 24 is greater than 12. So also, you have to use your handspans to compare 2 different objects, because if you use your handspans for one object and another person's handspans for another object, the handspans won't be the same length. So you have to make sure the units are the same. So let's go through some vocabulary. So first terms are heavier and lighter. So when one object has a greater weight than another object, that means it is heavier. If it has less weight, it is lighter. So if an object is longer or taller or shorter, that means these are also other measurements. So if an object is of greater length than another object, it means it is longer. So your desk is longer than your notebook because it's of greater length. The length is more. If it is of lesser length, it means it is shorter. For example, 3 handspans is of greater length than 2 handspans. If there is a greater amount of water, we say more. if there's a lesser amount of water, we say less. So water is just an example, but let's say we had 2 cups and they are both the same size. One of the cups is half full and one cup is completely full. So let's think about that. Which cup has more water? Obviously the cup that's completely full, because the cup that is completely full has more water in it. So we would say the cup that is completely full has more water than the cup that is half full, assuming the cups are of the same size. Let's do some practice problems. The desk is 8 handspans long, and the notebook is 2 handspans long. Which one is longer? Compare the length in a sentence. So you guys think about this one for a few minutes, and then I'll explain the answer. So take maybe So now that we've compared, now that you've made the sentence, let's go over the answer. So 8 is greater than 2, correct? And that means the desk is longer. So in the sentence we would say the desk is longer than the notebook. Okay? So note that down. The desk is longer than the notebook. And you can pause the video if you need to take any of these notes. So we already talked about this one, but let's just go back to it. So if we have 2 glasses, the glasses are the same size. One is completely filled and the other is half filled. So let's say glass A filled, glass B half filled. So that means we would say glass A has more water than glass B. So we can do 2 comparisons here. Either we can say this, or we can say glass B has less water than glass A, because glass A is filled and glass B is not filled. Okay? So we can also make comparisons the other way. So let's say person A is taller than person B. We can also say person B is shorter than person A. So these are different ways that we can use these terms. So take 2 objects in your hand and determine which one weighs more based on how it feels. Then make a sentence comparing them. So just find 2 objects and put them in your hands. So now that we've done taller and shorter and longer, now we're going to go on to heavier and lighter. So do this. Take 2 objects and put one in each hand and see which one feels like has more weight. Basically, which one feels like has like maybe larger or has more weight. So like for example, if you take a soccer ball in one hand and a penny in the other hand, the soccer ball is going to feel like it has more weight. So do this, take a couple minutes, find 2 objects. Then we'll come back. Also, make a sentence comparing the two objects based on their weight. So, assuming that the sentence is set up like this. So you have object A, which is whatever object, which is one of the objects you chose, and then object B. So in this hypothetical situation, let's assume that object A has a heavier weight than object B. So these are just placeholders, object A and object B. So object A is blank than object B. Which one? If object A has more weight than object B, what should we fill in here? The correct answer is heavier, because the object that has more weight is heavier. So since object A has more weight, that means it's heavier than object B. So use this to compare your objects. Which object is heavier? Whichever one has more weight is going to be heavier. So now let's go on to more practice. So write down your own definition regarding the terms longer, shorter, heavier, lighter, and more/less. So one way that we can understand more is by explaining it to ourselves. So write down your own definitions to explain the terms longer and shorter. So what happens, or compare how to compare objects using those two terms. So like one object is longer, one object is shorter than another object. Then write definitions for heavier and lighter, and then more/less. So do that in your notebook or on a piece of paper. Then we'll go over it. Okay, so now let's go through some definitions. So just to review, if a object has greater length or greater height, then is taller or longer. So if it has greater length, it's longer, and if it's like greater height, then it is longer. So let's say your desk is longer than your notebook. And then shorter is when the height is less than another object. And these are adjectives that you use to compare different different objects. So heavier and lighter, let's check your definition for this. So you should have talked about how an object is heavier if it has more weight and lighter if it has less weight, if it is of less weight. So a soccer ball is heavier than a penny is lighter than a soccer ball. So these are adjectives that you can use to compare the different weight or height or length of objects. And more or less, so more or less can be used to compare how much of something there is. Like, let's say water, there's more water in the bucket than in the cup if both are fully filled. Let's say I have 5 apples and John has 3 apples. I have more apples than John because 5 is greater than 3. Okay. So we're halfway through. We're almost done. So now it's time to fully understand. Now it's time to make sure we fully understand the concept of measurement. We're going to do some practice problems. So go through these 4 practice problems. Let's do each one at a time, and you're going to get 2 minutes for each one. So what is heavier, a rock or a leaf? And don't just say a rock or don't just say a leaf. Think about it, then make a comparison in your notebook. So write down a comparison. That's why I'm giving you 2 weeks. So say which object A is heavier than object B. And then make the opposite comparison. Object B is lighter than object A. So make 2 comparisons for question 1. Then we'll go to question 2. And for each question, we'll make 2 comparisons. So total, you should number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and each in your notebook. And for each number, we will write comparison. So just make some bullet points. Okay, so it's been a minute maybe. So let's look at this. So which one is heavier, a rock or a leaf? So in your notebook, you should have written a rock is heavier than a leaf. And then you should have written a leaf is lighter than a rock. So that's how we make comparisons between the two. 1 second. Okay, yes. We are here now. So next thing. What is longer, a truck or a car? So here's an image of a truck. Here's an image of a car. You can't really find a truck or a car. So just think about it in your head. Which one is longer? Okay. So do this and then we'll go over it. Okay, so now that you had some time for that, we should have written 2 comparisons in our notebook. So make sure you're writing these comparisons in your notebook, because writing them will help you learn them more. So what is longer, a truck or a car? So here, a truck is longer than a car. Okay? So a truck here is longer, because if we look at the length here, from this part to this part, that's going to be more than in a car, because a car is smaller, the length isn't as much. So what is heavier, a desk or a notebook? And just so that we know, so length is, 1 second, just so that we know. You see this line I'm making? A length is this sort of measurement. So from the back end to the front end of the truck, from the front to the back, that horizontal length that's what we call the length. Okay? So if you have a person, that vertical, so from the bottom to the top, that would be called height. So that's how we compare if someone is taller or shorter. So now we'll go to what is heavier, a desk or a notebook. So a desk is, well, you guys, it will be hard to do this because you can't pick up your desk really. But just think about it. Which one do you think is going to be heavier, a desk or a notebook? Which one do you think has more weight? Based on what you see, which one do you think has more weight? So write the comparisons in your notebook. And it's important to note that there are ways to measure a desk and measure the weight of a notebook, so you can use a scale. But in today's video, since we're just doing introduction, we're not going to be using very precise measurements. We're just going to be doing it based on what we see and what we feel. But you can measure exactly using like meters and kilometers for length, and kilograms and grams and other measurements. You can use scales and meter sticks for exact measurements. But here we're just going to be doing based on what we see and what we feel. Okay, so the desk is heavier than the notebook, and the notebook is lighter than the desk. So we should have written those two comparisons. So right now you should have around 5 comparisons in your notebook. Now let's go on to the next one. Which object has more water in it when completely filled, a cup or a bucket? So think about in your head. Which one do you think is going to hold more water? The cup, which is small, or the bucket, which is much larger? Yep, the bucket has more water when it is completely filled than the cup, because a bucket, it can hold a lot of water, while a cup, it doesn't hold as much water. So we'll say the bucket has more water in it than the cup, or the cup has less water than the bucket. So now let's look at our homework. So I want you to find two objects and compare their height and compare their weight. Or you can compare the length and the weight. So which object is heavier? Which object is taller or longer or shorter? So find two objects, do this, and then write down your observations in your notebook. And make sure to review the notes from today's presentation.